Land that helicopter now or you're going to jail. The self-appointed HOA enforcer shrieked as a rescue chopper hovered above my farm, ready to save a trapped child. She waved a fake badge and blocked the landing zone, ignoring the neighbors shouting for help. Her threat: evict me for illegal air traffic. But that single moment sparked a chain of events she could never have predicted. Minutes later, red and blue lights washed over my lawn, and that was the first crack in her so-called empire. She thought she ruled the neighborhood. In truth, she just signed the death certificate for her own reign. But that part comes later. It really began months earlier, on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was in the vegetable garden with my kids, Ethan and Lily, watering the tomato plants my late wife, Sarah, had lovingly set in the soil before she passed. The Texas heat was already heavy in the air, and the sounds of suburbia drifted in: a car doors slamming, coffee brewing, AC units humming. I didn't hear the trouble coming, a broken bar, until it marched across my lawn in sensible shoes. "Excuse me, sir." Jake Fletcher. The voice sliced through the quiet like a rusted blade. I turned to see a woman in her early 50s, a clipboard clutched to her chest as though it were a shield, measuring tape dangling from her belt like a sheriff's sidearm. Her badge read, K. Blackwood HOA Compliance Officer. Her eyes carried the cold certainty of someone who lived for other people's misery. "I'm here regarding violations of Article 8.3 of the Sunset Ridge Estates Community Standards," she said. "Your fruit trees are over the 4-foot height limit near the property line." I straightened, dirt still on my hands. "Mom, this home's been standing since '87. My wife and I bought it years before any HOA existed here. Those apple trees were planted by the previous owner back in the '90s. Ethan froze mid-watering, edging closer. Lily kept playing in the sprinkler, blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic storm brewing. Blackwood scribbled on her clipboard like she was signing a death order. "Mr. Fletcher, the Sunset Ridge HOA was incorporated in 2019, and the rules apply retroactively. You have 48 hours to remove the non-compliant vegetation or face a $500 fine." She glanced around our garden as if inspecting a 5-star kitchen for roaches. "I'll also be conducting a full property assessment in the coming weeks." That night, after tucking in the kids, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter that had arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't just a violation notice, it was a summons to county court for serious urban planning violations. The formal language almost made me doubt myself. A broken bar until I remembered Sarah's smile the day she planted those trees, talking about how our kids would eat fresh apples every fall. The pandemic had already taken so much from us. I wasn't about to let a power-hungry HOA strip away what little of her legacy remained. The next morning, I started digging into Karen Blackwood's online presence. Her Facebook page was a goldmine of pettiness, hundreds of posts about protecting property values and community standards, with blurry snapshots of supposed infractions: grass a quarter-inch too tall, mailboxes painted the wrong shade of beige, kids' bikes left out after dark. But then I saw posts about my own home, complete with photos of my kids playing outside. Worse, one shot was taken through Lily's bedroom window as she got ready for school. The caption lectured neighbors about proper window treatments for community uniformity. Dozens of people had liked it. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about apple trees or bylaws. This was about power and a woman who'd found a legal way to terrorize a neighborhood. I called my friend Marcus Cooper, who lived nearby with his grandmother, Rose. Marcus was a quiet tech wizard who'd given up a career in drone engineering to care for her full-time. "Jake, I was wondering when you'd reach out," he said. "She's been after my grandma for months. Said her roses were too fragrant. But I found something yesterday you need to see." We met at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood, out of range of her prying eyes. Marcus opened his laptop and showed me aerial footage from one of his drones. "See these?" he said, pointing at small dark spots scattered around the community. "Hidden cameras in trees, on utility poles, even inside lamp posts. I've counted at least 12, and guess which property is the most heavily watched. The realization felt like a punch. She wasn't just snooping, she'd built an entire surveillance network. And in Texas, filming someone on private property without their consent is a felony, up to $10,000 per device. The damages I was looking at could easily hit six figures, and that was just for the privacy violations. Marcus, why haven't you gone to the police about this? I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew the answer. His expression darkened as he shut the laptop. Because 3 years ago, I got pulled over for driving suspiciously in my own neighborhood. They locked me up for 6 hours, tore my car apart looking for drugs that didn't exist. Deputy Rodriguez is a good guy, but the rest of the department, let's just say they don't. See the difference between the good coopers and the bad ones? He shook his head. But filming kids through their bedroom windows? That's a line I can't ignore. That night, while checking the security around Lily's bedroom, I spotted the final piece of Karen's surveillance puzzle, a tiny camera nestled in the old oak tree on the property line. It was no bigger than a matchbox, weatherproofed, and painted to match the bark. What chilled me wasn't just the invasion of privacy, it was how long it had been there. The mounting screws showed months of weathering. She hadn't just started watching when the whole drama began, she'd been documenting our lives from the moment we moved in, waiting for the perfect time to strike. I held that camera and thought of Sarah, who'd always told our kids that home was the one place where they could feel safe. Karen had shattered that sanctuary, turning our private life into her twisted reality show. But as I stared at that unblinking black eye that had watched my daughter sleep, I realized something else. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. I finally had all the evidence I needed to take her down. The war would start tomorrow. The next morning, I stood in my driveway holding the camera, its corroded screws silently telling the story of months of illegal spying. I knew I needed Marcus's expertise. But when I called him early, his answer caught me off guard. "Jake, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not sure I'm the right guy for this fight," he said, his voice heavy with the weariness of someone who'd been burned before. I drove over anyway. In his garage, he was surrounded by drone parts and glowing computer screens. Outside, his grandmother, Rose, tended to her famous rose garden, the same one Karen had once claimed was too fragrant. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman running a covert camera network was offended by the smell of flowers. "I get why you're hesitant," I told him, showing the camera. "But this isn't about fighting the system anymore. It's about protecting kids." Marcus studied the device with sharp focus. "This is high-end tech, 6 months of battery life, wireless transmission, night vision. Whoever bought this spent serious money." He paused, looking up at me with a mix of anger and resignation. "You know why I don't trust cops? That traffic stop 3 years ago, a young black man, nice car. After dark, they figured I was a dealer. I wasn't. Didn't matter." I understood his hesitation. But then his gaze shifted to Rose, humming softly as she pruned her roses, unaware her privacy had been violated for months. When I think about that camera pointing at kids' bedrooms, a broken bar, or some creep watching my grandmother through her kitchen window, tracking her every move, a broken bar. He set the camera down gently. "That crosses a line even I can't ignore." We spent the next 2 hours flying Marcus's drone, mapping every hidden camera in the neighborhood. What we found was worse than either of us had imagined. This wasn't a few random spy cams. It was a coordinated surveillance grid covering 12 specific homes. And the targets weren't random, they were families with kids, elderly people living alone, or anyone who'd ever pushed back against the HOA. It wasn't oversight. It was a hit list. "Jake, this is high-level stuff," Marcus said, scrolling through the footage. "Look at the placement, the overlapping coverage. This is organized surveillance meant to gather intel on certain people." Every house on the map had racked up multiple HOA violations in the past 6 months. Karen wasn't just watching, she was building airtight cases. That afternoon, I decided to contact the one person in law enforcement I thought I could actually trust, Deputy Rodriguez. my old high school teammate and someone who still owed me a favor. If there was anyone in law enforcement who might actually hear me out, it was Rodriguez. I found him at the county courthouse, finishing paperwork from his morning shift. "Rodriguez, I need 5 minutes," I said, laying the camera and Marcus's drone footage on the table. Karen Blackwood from the Sunset Ridge HOA is running an illegal surveillance network on families with kids. Rodriguez studied the evidence with the practiced eye of a man who knew the difference between petty complaints and real crimes. "Jake, this is serious. In Texas, recording someone on their private property without consent is a felony. Each camera could mean up to a $10,000 fine and 2 years in prison." He leaned closer to the digital map Marcus had drawn. "But here's what bothers me. This isn't some nosy neighbor. The targeting is deliberate. The gear is professional grade. This looks like organized harassment with criminal intent." Finally, someone in authority was taking it seriously. But then Rodriguez's tone shifted. "Here's the problem. Karen's not just some busybody. She's spent the last 2 years building political connections. She's donated to the sheriff's campaign, helped with the mayor's wife's charity events, and made herself useful to people with influence. If we're going to take her down, we need proof so solid it can't be buried." That night, I was installing extra security lights outside Lily's window when my phone buzzed. It was an email from Karina, subject line, "Final notice, compliance required." But it wasn't a normal HOA citation. It was a mass email to 53 households, complete with aerial photos of their properties and supposed infractions. In mine, she painted me as the neighborhood menace, claiming my agricultural activities endangered the community. She dressed it up in legal jargon, even citing county ordinances that didn't exist, creating a neat little paper trail of evidence against me. The last paragraph made my blood boil. "Residents should be aware that Mr. Fletcher has been observed engaging in suspicious nighttime activities around neighbors' properties. For your family's safety, please report any unusual behavior to HOA security immediately." I called Marcus right away. "She's not just spying, Anna Maria. She's trying to turn the neighborhood against me. And the worst part? It might work." I heard Marcus typing in the background. "Jake, remember what Rodriguez said about evidence that can't be ignored? What if we give Karen exactly what she wants and let her think she's winning right up until the moment we prove she's broken federal law?" That night, I lay awake thinking of Sarah. She'd always believed good people eventually win if they refuse to quit. Karen thought she was building a case to paint me as the villain while she played the hero. She had no idea she'd just picked the wrong target. The next day, Marcus and I would start building our counterattack. 3 days after I hired private investigator Tom Brennan, the phone call came. "Jake, sit down for this," Tom's gravelly voice said. "Your HOA president isn't who she says she is. What I found is going to blow this whole thing wide open." We met at Murphy's Diner, 20 miles out of town. Tom slid a manila folder across the table like it was classified intel. "Meet Brenda Kulski," he said, flipping the folder open. The photo was nothing like the clipboard-wielding suburban tyrant I knew. Shorter hair, hollow eyes, the hunted look of someone who'd burned every bridge behind them. She legally changed her name to Karen Blackwood in 2018. Tom continued. "Right after being fired from Pinnacle Security Services for falsifying safety certifications. She was selling fake security clearances to anyone with cash, until one of her cleared employees robbed his workplace blind." I stared at the documents, coffee going cold in my hands. This wasn't just a controlling neighbor. This was a career criminal who'd rebuilt her life in my quiet suburb. "Tom, how does someone with a past like this end up running our HOA? Don't they do background checks?" The investigator gave a bitter laugh. "Most HOAs are run by volunteers. They're either too busy or too trusting to dig into someone's history. Brenda shows up looking competent, offers to do the job no one else wants, and suddenly she's the indispensable leader." But the real gut punch was still coming. Tom slid over another set of papers, and my hands began to tremble as I read. She has 3 restraining orders, Tom said, all from former co-workers between 2017 and 2019. Each one describes the same behavior: surveillance, harassment, false police report, and an obsessive need to control every aspect of someone's life. The police reports read like a twisted preview of what she'd been doing in our neighborhood: hidden cameras in apartment complexes, bogus accusations of drug dealing, even turning up uninvited at victims' kids' schools. Then Tom pulled out bank records that made my head spin. The current HOA treasurer, Betty Kulski, isn't just a board member, she's Brenda's mother. And she has no clue her daughter's been using her accounts to embezzle from the community fund. The numbers told the story: $34,000 siphoned away over 18 months through fake maintenance invoices and phantom repair bills. I thought of Betty, always quiet at meetings, always letting her daughter dominate the conversation. Now I understood why. Tom, are you telling me she's been stealing from her own mother while robbing the entire neighborhood? He nodded grimly. Betty's been sending her money for years, thinking she was helping her get back on her feet. She had no idea she was bankrolling a criminal operation. That evening, I faced a moment I'd been dreading. Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table, his 12-year-old face older than it should have looked. Dad, some kids at school are saying their parents think you're causing trouble. Are we gonna have to move? The question hit like a punch to the gut because I'd been asking myself the same thing. I pulled him close, glancing around at Lily's drawings on the fridge and Sarah's smile in the framed photos. Ethan, remember what Mom used to say about the right thing? He nodded and recited softly, the right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same thing. That's right. And sometimes, when you're fighting for something that matters, it gets scary before it gets better. He looked at me, eyes filled with more loss than any kid should have known. But what if she's stronger than us, Dad? What if she wins? I took a breath, my resolve solidifying. Your mom would want us to stand up to Bulissa even when it's frightening. This is our home. She planted those apple trees here. She taught you to ride your bike in that driveway. Some things are worth fighting for, and our right to feel safe is one of them. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I made the most important phone call of this entire ordeal. Betty Kulski answered on the 3rd ring, her voice weary and tired. Mrs. Kulski, this is Jake Fletcher. I need to talk to you about your daughter and I need you to hear me out before you hang up. A pause, then, if this is about those HOA violations, I've told Karen she might be too aggressive, but she won't listen to me anymore. It's not about the violations, I said gently. It's about the fact that your daughter has been stealing from the community fund, using your financial information. The silence that followed stretched so long I thought she'd ended the call. Then, in a whisper, what are you talking about? I spent 20 minutes explaining everything Tom had uncovered: her fake name change, the embezzlement, the years of manipulative and criminal behavior. I wondered where she was getting the money for all that security equipment. Betty finally said, her voice heavy with realization. She told me she was doing consulting work for other communities. I never imagined she was stealing from her neighbors while terrorizing them. I could hear her crying softly on the other end, the sound of someone's world collapsing. Mrs. Kulski, I know this is hard, but I need your help to stop her before she hurts someone else. Will you help me expose her? Almost a full minute passed before she spoke again, her voice growing steadier with each word. Mr. Fletcher, my daughter is sick. I've made her worse by trying to love her back into being the person I wanted her to be. But you're right, this has gone too far. Tell me what you need me to do. By midnight, we had a plan. The plan we put together would dismantle Karen's entire scheme piece by piece. Betty agreed to give me full access to the HOA's financial records, a solid proof of the embezzlement that no one could dispute. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. That sense of control lasted less than a day. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, Ethan came rushing into the kitchen, his face pale and furious. Dad, There's some guy in the driveway taking pictures of the house. He's got a badge and everything. I looked out the window and saw a stocky man in his 40s snapping photos with what looked like official equipment. Standing next to him, clipboard in hand, was Karen, pointing out supposed violations like a commander orchestrating a battle. I stepped outside, and that's when I met Trevor Hammerstein, Karen's newest recruit in her suburban crusade. He was driving a Ford Crown Victoria dressed up to look exactly like a police cruiser, complete with decals and a light bar. His outfit was a patchwork of tactical gear meant to scream authority, though up close it felt more like a Halloween costume. "I'm Chief Security Officer Hammerstein with the HOA Enforcement Division," he announced, voice booming with the kind of confidence that comes from expecting compliance. "We're performing a thorough security inspection on flagged properties." Up close, I noticed his badge was just a cheap security shield with the words "Help Police" printed on label tape. "And which government agency would that be?" I asked, because last time I checked, HOAs in Texas don't have police powers. Karen stepped in before he could answer, eyes shining with the thrill of having muscle at her side. "The Sunset Ridge HOA has contracted Hammerstein Security to enforce safety and compliance. Chief Hammerstein has full investigative authority." She spoke like she'd just unveiled a secret weapon, but I could sense the desperation in her tone. 3 days later, things went from absurd to dangerous. Marcus called me in a fury. "Jake, they blocked my grandmother's ambulance." His voice was tight with panic. Rose Cooper had been experiencing chest pains, and Marcus dialed 911 immediately. But when the ambulance arrived, Trevor's fake patrol car was parked sideways across the narrow street. He refused to move it until the paramedics showed him proper HOA transport permits. They ended up parking 2 blocks away and carrying Rose on a stretcher. "She could have died, Jake," Marcus said, voice breaking. "All because Karen's boyfriend wanted to play cop." That evening, I attended what Karen had grandly labeled an emergency community safety meeting at the HOA clubhouse. I expected a few curious residents, or what I found was a packed room. Karen stood front and center like a general delivering orders, with Trevor looming behind her in full fake uniform. "Residents of Sunset Ridge," Karen began, her tone dripping with manufactured authority, "our community is facing unprecedented threats to safety and property values." She clicked through a slideshow of photos of my yard, my kids, my daily life, all twisted into security concerns. Even Lily's bicycle and Ethan's basketball hoop were labeled as hazards. She turned our family's ordinary life into a case file. But in the crowd sat Judge Patricia Winters, a sharp-eyed figure I knew from the courthouse. After Karen's speech, the judge rose with a calm, deliberate intensity. "Miss Blackwood," she said, "what legal authority gives you the right to conduct surveillance on private citizens and block emergency medical responders?" Trevor stepped forward, puffing himself up. "HOA Security has broad powers under Covenant Enforcement Protocol, sir." The judge's smile was cold enough to freeze the room. "Mr. Hammerstein, impersonating a police officer is a third-degree felony in Texas, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Would you like to tell me exactly what training and certification allow you to operate that vehicle and wear those badges?" Trevor's face went from red to pale in seconds. Karen opened her mouth, but Judge Winters silenced her with a raised hand. "And blocking emergency medical personnel," the judge continued, "is a federal crime with mandatory prison time. I recommend both of you seek counsel immediately, because this isn't community management. It's organized criminal conduct." The room fell into stunned silence before the meeting began to unravel. The meeting had dissolved into cozy neighbors arguing, Karen shouting about outside agitators. But beneath all the noise, I noticed something new. For the first time since this nightmare began, both Karen and Trevor looked unsettled. They'd gone too far, and now they were facing someone who actually understood the laws they'd been pretending to enforce. When I got home that night, I found a strip of yellow police tape across my driveway, a handwritten sign taped to it, "Crime Scene, a Sheriff Blackwood, a investigation. Do not enter." Instead of fear, I felt a strange clarity. This wasn't power. This was theater, props and posturing from two people desperate to keep their little illusion alive. They weren't defenders of the community, they were crooks in costume. And starting tomorrow, I would treat them exactly as such. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of flawless Texas weather that almost makes you forget your troubles. We'd been preparing for our open farm day for weeks, so a chance to welcome families into Sarah's garden, to show that our homestead was about community and learning, not defiance. 15 families had signed up for hands-on lessons in gardening, composting, and sustainable living. Mason Rodriguez arrived with his father around 10. The boy's energy lit up the place immediately, darting between raised beds, firing off questions about earthworms, irrigation, and compost like a junior scientist on a mission. Deputy Rodriguez looked more relaxed than I'd seen in months, watching his son inspect a tomato plant as if it were a rare gem. "Jake, this is exactly what this neighborhood needs," he said. "These kids should know where their food comes from, feel the soil in their hands, see something grow." I was teaching a group of kids how to identify herbs when Mason noticed the old chicken coop at the back of the property. Sarah had built it years earlier during her short-lived chicken raising phase, before we learned the city noise made egg production nearly impossible. We'd since turned the structure into a beam trellis, but the peaked roof and wooden beams still stood about 8 feet higher, a tempting climbing frame for adventurous kids. "Mr. Fletcher, can I climb up that to get pictures of the whole farm for my school project?" he asked, already scanning the beams for handholds. I should have said number. The coop wasn't meant to bear a third grader's weight, but Mason was Deputy Rodriguez's son, and I wanted to show I trusted him. "All right, but you just be careful, and don't go higher than you can get down safely." The collapse happened in slow motion. Mason had made it about 6 feet up when one of the main beams, rotted from years of Texas sun and winter frost, snapped with a sharp, splintering crack. The structure folded sideways, and Mason vanished under a mess of timber and chicken wire. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the most chilling sound I've ever heard: a Deputy Rodriguez screaming his son's name, while parents sprinted toward the wreckage. I reached Mason first. He was pinned under a heavy beam, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. His face was ghostly pale, his breathing shallow. "Don't move him," Rodriguez barked, training taking over even as his voice shook. "Possible spinal injury, a possible internal bleeding. Call 911. I was already on the phone. Mason's breathing was worsening, each inhale shallower than the last. I saw fear in Rodriguez's eyes that he couldn't mask. The 911 operator confirmed what we dreaded: a Mason needed immediate airlift to the trauma center. "Flight for Life is sending a Black Hawk," the dispatcher said. "ETA 7 minutes. Clear a 100-foot landing zone. Remove anything that can blow in Rotor, Washington." Parents scattered, dragging cars out of the driveway, securing loose tools and chairs. I stayed beside Mason, keeping him talking about his school project, about the photos he was going to show his mom. Then, over the horizon, we heard the distant thump of rotor blades. Mason was no longer responding when I spoke to him. His lips had taken on a bluish tint, and Deputy Rodriguez was giving rescue breaths, tears streaking down his face. Then, over the treetops, the Black Hawk appeared like hope itself descending from the sky. The pilots scanned our makeshift landing zone, preparing for approach. I told myself everything would be fine. Mason would reach the hospital. The trauma team would fix him up. This whole ordeal would eventually be just a terrifying story we'd tell years down the road. That's when Karen Blackwood appeared from behind the barn, striding into the open like some kind of suburban enforcer, clipboard held high over her head as if it were a stop sign. She marched directly into the helicopter's path. Between the roar of the rotors and the chaos on the ground, I couldn't make out her words at first. The pilot circled once, clearly unsure why a lone figure was standing in his landing zone. Meanwhile, Mason's breathing grew even more labored, and Deputy Rodriguez looked like he was on the verge of breaking. I ran toward Karen, ready to physically remove her if needed, until she yanked out what looked like an official badge and bellowed over the noise, I'm Sheriff Blackwood, HOA Enforcement Division. Unauthorized medical flights require HOA permit. Land that helicopter and you're all under arrest for illegal air traffic violations. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio. Civilian interference with a medical emergency. Individual claiming law enforcement authority blocking landing zone. Something inside me snapped. I pulled out my phone, opened Facebook Live, and began broadcasting. Within moments, other parents followed suit, capturing every second of Karen's madness while Mason lay fighting for his life behind us. "He's dying, the move," I yelled at her. But she stood firm, waving that fake badge like it could turn her fantasy into reality. The pilot made another cautious approach, clearly hoping she'd step aside. Instead, she positioned herself directly beneath the hovering aircraft, forcing him to pull up again. Mason had stopped breathing entirely now, and Deputy Rodriguez was performing full CPR as parents live-streamed the nightmare. The hashtag #SaveMason was already trending locally by the time dispatch responded with a chilling update. Federal interference protocol activated. SWAT authorized for obstruction of emergency medical services. The distant wail of sirens rolled toward us like a storm. Karen had finally crossed the linear. This wasn't about property lines or HOA bylaws anymore. She'd endangered a child, and there was no walking back from that. She glanced around at the dozens of phones aimed at her, at the parents' faces filled with disgust, at the helicopter overhead still waiting for clearance. For the first time since I'd known her, Karen looked uncertain, as though she was realizing her game had spiraled into something deadly. But it was too late. The rumble of SWAT vehicles grew louder. Still, Karen stood planted in the landing zone like some deranged scarecrow, shrieking about air traffic rules while a boy's life slipped away behind her. What none of us knew then was that the FBI had been quietly investigating the Sunset Ridge HOA for 6 months, following a tip about organized fraud sent to a federal community corruption task force. 4 black armored trucks tore across my property, followed by 2 more helicopters landing in the adjacent field. Over 30 federal agents in full tactical gear fanned out with the precision of a military strike. My quiet farm had become the set of an action movie. The lead SWAT commander, a stone-faced woman with Torres on her nameplate, approached Karen with the cool authority of someone used to handling real threats. "Mom, step away from the landing zone immediately," she ordered. Instead, Karen edged even closer to the helicopter and shouted back, "I am the duly elected sheriff of this community. You're all in violation of HOA Regulation 12C. Show me your permits." The sheer absurdity of an HOA president trying to arrest federal agents might have been laughable if a child wasn't dying while she played out her fantasy. Commander Torres signaled to her team, and 2 agents flanked Karen while a 3rd inspected the badge. She kept brandishing. "Mom," the agent said loudly, for everyone to hear, "this is a plastic cosplay badge bought on Amazon for $12.99. You are not a sworn law enforcement officer, and you are currently obstructing a federal medical emergency." The statement rang out over the noise, and a ripple of shocked gasps moved through the crowd of parents filming on their phones. Karen's illusion of authority was unraveling right there in the dirt for everyone to see, but she still wasn't ready to quit humiliating herself. "I demand to speak to the manager of the FBI," she screeched, her voice hitting a pitch that probably sent birds fleeing for a mile in every direction. 2 federal agents guided her away from the landing zone, and for the first time, the Flight for Life helicopter was able to set down. The trauma team bolted from the aircraft, carrying sleek equipment that looked like it had been borrowed from the set of a science fiction film. In moments, they had Mason stabilized, loaded into the chopper, and airborne toward the regional trauma center. Parents erupted in cheers as Deputy Rodriguez climbed in beside his son, holding his small hand all the way. But the day's drama was only shifting gears. While Karen continued ranting about federal violations of HOA sovereignty, Commander Torres was already speaking into her radio, dispatching other units to a secondary location 3 miles away, the Sunset Ridge HOA clubhouse. "Primary subject is in custody. Torres reported calmly. Proceed with search of secondary site per warrant. Then she turned to the watching neighbors and said something that made my stomach drop. Folks, a broken bar. What you just saw? That's only the tip of a very big iceberg. You're about to learn what your whole leadership has really been up to. The SWAT convoy rolled toward the community center like a parade of reckoning, half the neighborhood trailing behind in cars to watch. In the parking lot, Trevor Hammerstein was waiting, still dressed in his knockoff police uniform. Convinced, somehow, that he could talk himself out of this mess, he swaggered toward Commander Torres. Officer, I'm Chief Hammerstein with HOA Security Services. I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding. Torres eyed his costume like one might study a particularly pitiful bug. Mr. Hammerstein, you're under arrest for impersonating a law enforcement officer, interfering with emergency medical services, and about 15 other federal offenses we'll discuss at headquarters. As agent scuffed him, Trevor kept babbling about how HOA authority overrode federal law, completely oblivious that his fantasy had just crashed headfirst into reality. The true shock came when SWAT breached the basement of the clubhouse. What they found could only be described as a suburban spy hub, more than 20 monitors showing live camera feeds from all over the neighborhood, including inside private homes, bedrooms, and family spaces that should have been completely off limits. And this wasn't just creepy voyeurism. Each screen was labeled with family names and a color-coded threat ranking: a green for compliant, yellow for potential trouble, and red for priority removal. Agent Martinez from the Cybercrimes Unit called over Torres's radio. You'll want to see the server room. They've got AI facial recognition tracking over 200 families, license plate readers, predictive movement algorithms, and full psychological profiles for every resident. The tech was more advanced than anything I'd seen outside of a high-budget thriller. Realizing Karen had been using it to monitor my kids made me feel sick. The hidden horrors didn't stop there. Behind a false wall, agents uncovered an arsenal fit for a small military: 30 semi-automatic rifles, tactical gear stamped HOA enforcement, smoke grenades, and body armor with convincing insignia. Trevor's fake cop act hadn't just been for show, it had been preparation for some kind of armed operation that, thankfully, never came to pass. As if that weren't enough, the financial crimes painted an even uglier picture. Agents recovered $9 million in cash from 47 hidden safety deposit boxes throughout the building of funds falsely recorded as community improvement expenses that were supposed to have gone toward landscaping and maintenance. Agent Martinez later confirmed that Karen and Trevor had been laundering drug money through a network of sham HOAs in 3 states, using fake assessment fees and phantom construction projects as cover. That's when Betty Kulski arrived, looking like the week had aged her a decade. She handed Commander Torres a hard drive containing 8 terabytes of financial records, months of secret copying on her part, documenting every fake invoice, every fraudulent assessment, every shady transaction her daughter had engineered. My daughter is very sick, Betty said softly. I should have stopped her years ago, but I kept hoping she'd change. I never imagined it had gotten this bad. The last brick in Karen's empire fell when they searched her personal computer and found a file labeled Operation Clean Sweep, a detailed plan to force 47 non-compliant families out of the neighborhood through harassment, false lawsuits, and staged incidents designed to ruin lives. My own family's name topped the list, complete with notes on our psychological pressure points and suggested dates for maximum impact. As federal agents loaded Karen into a transport van, she was still shrieking about constitutional rights and demanding, of all things, that someone bring her the real manager of the FBI. As she kept shouting about wanting to speak to higher authorities, a strange calm washed over me, something I hadn't felt in months. The woman who had turned our quiet neighborhood into her own surveillance kingdom, stolen from friends and neighbors, and nearly let a child die just to protect her false sense of power, was finally facing the reckoning she'd long deserved. The crowd watching the arrests was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were embracing. Families who had been isolated by her fear tactics were laughing together. Kids who had been too scared to play outside were now darting across the parking lot like they'd just been set free. For the first time in ages, our neighborhood actually felt like a community again. Months later, I stood in what used to be our modest backyard garden, now expanded into Sarah's community garden. Mason Rodriguez, fully recovered and smiling, cut the ribbon with oversized golden scissors. Ironically, the same woman who had tried to shut us down had unintentionally helped us create something far greater than we ever imagined. The federal case against Karen Blackwood, a real name Brenda Kulskia, played out like something from a crime drama. She was charged with dozens of counts: racketeering, money laundering, stalking, and fraud in multiple states. Investigators uncovered that her scheme had been running for nearly a decade, stealing tens of millions from unsuspecting communities through fake HOA fees and bogus improvement projects. Trevor Hammerstein was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His fake patrol car was auctioned off, bought by Marcus Cooper, who painted it bright pink and donated it to a children's charity. Seeing that silly pink police car full of laughing kids driving past my house never failed to remind me that justice sometimes comes with a sense of humor. The government recovered millions linked directly to stolen neighborhood funds, distributing it back to every family who'd been targeted. My share went into turning our land into a fully functional community garden, complete with educational programs, composting classes, and a small farm stand that donated fresh produce to local food banks. I knew Sarah would have loved it. The Sunset Ridge HOA was officially dissolved. Without Karen's iron control and Trevor's fake authority, the whole thing fell apart overnight. In its place, the residents voted to form a simple neighborhood association, one that focused on block parties, clean parks, and friendly cooperation instead of petty rules and intimidation. A new sign at the entrance read, "HOA Free Zone, a freedom since 2024. It quickly became a local landmark. Life surprised me in other ways, too. Judge Patricia Winters and I began dating after bonding over what she called the legal rebellion against suburban tyranny. She had spent years fighting people like Karen from the bench, and apparently my part in standing up to her had made an impression. My kids adored Patricia, especially when she helped them plant raised garden beds while teaching them about constitutional rights. I'm certain Sarah would have approved. The best part, though, was the atmosphere. The cameras were gone. The fake police cars were gone. The constant fear was gone. What replaced it was something I thought we'd lost forever: a trust. One bright Saturday morning, while watching Mason, Lily, and Ethan race between the garden beds, I pulled a letter from my pocket. It bore the logo of the Nationwide HOA Alliance and was addressed directly to me. Inside was a request: Mr. Fletcher, we represent over 20 communities facing the same kind of abuse you experienced in Sunset Ridge. We've heard of your success, and we need your help. I looked around at our thriving garden, at families working together in Sarah's honor, at children playing freely without invisible eyes tracking them. Then I glanced at Patricia, surrounded by teenagers learning about their rights while planting tomatoes. Well, I thought, folding the letter away, looks like our little garden just turned into a movement. The fight against suburban tyranny was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we were winning. Have you ever felt powerless under the weight of someone abusing their authority? Seen bullies hide behind fake rules to target innocent families? Jake's story is proof that ordinary people can stand up, push back, and win, especially with evidence, courage, and a united community. Every Karen Blackwood thinks they're untouchably until someone calls their bluff. Your voice matters. Your story matters. If this resonates with you, give this a thumbs up and subscribe to Anna Drama Nest for more true tales where justice triumphs over control. Another HOA saga is close, and you made it through in one piece. Thanks for watching Anna Drama Nest, where the drama is real and the paperwork is a beast. Stay tuned for our next episode, where the neighborhood wars continue.